really remember how our entire lives we're dependent upon the kindness of other sentient beings. And so we're automatically connected with them, to them. There's nowhere where we can go where we're separate from other living beings. And we're always in relationship with them. And continually receiving their benefit from them. And so with this feeling of connection to other living beings, then let's have that be a motivating force for our spiritual practice, so that we're not doing our Dharma practice merely for ourselves, but to repay the kindness of other living beings, to do what we can to benefit them, considering their kindness to us, and considering that we have a precious human life, and so therefore we should really do our utmost to repay the kindness of others, since we have that fortune. So as His Holiness always says, with privilege comes responsibility. So if we have a precious human life, then we have some responsibility to use it for the welfare of other living beings. And so tonight, by listening to teachings in order to put them into practice, in order to progress on the path to full awakening for the benefit of living beings. And that's what we're doing. Okay, so right before I came here, I was reading a letter from one of the inmates who I've been corresponding with for some time. And he said that he had just been watching a TV program about how animals of different species bond with each other and help each other. So he said there was a dog with a baby fawn, a little fawn. The deer, its mother, had been hurt or lost or something, and so the dog took the fawn under its wing, so to speak, and made sure it was safe and took care of it. And one cat with ducklings. Whoa, yeah. Because apparently, right after meeting the ducklings, or right before meeting the ducklings, the cat had given birth to a litter of kittens. So when she met the ducklings, instead of eating them, she nursed the ducklings. Isn't that amazing? So this inmate was, he said that it was making his heart so full of love to think of this kind of bonding and kindness being shared across species, with living beings who often don't interact, let alone take care of each other in that way. Yeah, and so similarly for us, when we hear stories like that, does it affect you? And, it make you kind of feel rather loving inside. And so in that way to reach out to living beings who we may not ordinarily relate to. Yeah, people from a different country, a different religion, a different political party, a different socioeconomic class, and to reach out and have that sense of connection like all these animals did. Yeah? And so in that way to work for the benefit of living beings. Okay. So we'll continue with Precious Garland.
We're on verse 69, as I remember. And we have been we had been talking about in the previous verse of in the previous two verses he was refuting some of the ideas of the non-Buddhists who thought there was a self-existent permanent person, or the Vaishnavas who thought that the person is permanent and old, old meaning primordial without beginning or end, and Nagarjuna refuting that. And so now in 69, he's again refuting wrong ideas about the person. So the verse says, just as one conceives of a moment as having a last part, so too should one conceive of it as having a beginning and middle. Since a moment has a threefold temporal nature, the world does not remain for even a moment. Okay, so this is talking about that the momentary, whatever is momentary, has parts. So the momentary refers to impermanent phenomena, things that don't remain in the next moment. And so these are all the things we see and interact with around us. People, the environment, social roles, reputation, everything, that we encounter around us that functions, is under the influences of causes and conditions, and so thus it's impermanent, because the causes and conditions are changing, so the functional things that are the results of them are also changing all the time. So even though things around us and the people around us have changed as their very nature, so often we still relate to them as if they were inherently existent and hold them to be inherently existent. So that's why when, our car gets dented, we're surprised. When a person gets sick or dies, we're surprised. When our new clothes are ruined, because they get torn or something spills on them, we're surprised. Because somehow we think that all these things should be fixed. We know intellectually that they change. But inside we hold them as fixed.
So some people say that a moment is the time when something has arisen and not yet ceased. They accept that a moment is changing, that it doesn't endure for a second, but assert that while it does endure, it is inherently existent. Okay, so as we know, if something is inherently existent, it can't change. Okay, so Nagarjuna asks, since a moment has a last part, it must also have a middle part and a beginning part. Okay, and a moment cannot inherently abide without changing because it has these three parts. It has a beginning and middle and last part. Okay, so if it changes like that, then it can't inherently exist because it depends on its three parts. Okay, so it can't inherently exist because it's permanent. So it shows that it depends on causes and conditions. due to causal impermanence, and it's not inherently existent because it is dependent on its parts, which is talking about relational dependence. Okay, so different kinds of dependence here. So if we apply this to the world, in other words, the environment and the sentient beings in it, we see that the entire world cannot remain for one moment. So it's interesting to look around and think that everything around us, is going out of existence in each successive moment, never remaining the same, at all. And so thus also not having its own essence, because something that has its own essence would be frozen. It has its own independent essence, so it couldn't be modified by causes and conditions. Okay. Then verse 70 says, as with a moment, one should also consider the tripartite nature of its beginning, middle, and last part. Okay, there is no beginning, middle, or last part that arises either from itself or from something else. Okay, so this is refuting the inherent existence of that which has parts. Okay, so Joe Blow is back. He's in good form. And he says, although one moment has a beginning, middle, and last part, the beginning abides inherently, the middle abides inherently, and the end abides inherently. Right? So Nagarjuna says that no, they don't abide inherently. Okay, because just as one moment has three parts, each part also has a beginning and middle and last part. Okay, so, whatever when you're trying to find here's a moment. Yeah, now I got an inherently existent moment. But no, it has a beginning, middle, and last part. Yeah. Then, but the beginning also has a beginning, middle, and last part. And so does the middle part, and so does the last part. And in those, each of the beginning, middle, and last parts also have beginning, middle, and last parts. Okay? Because with time, time is going along, and so for one moment to connect to a next moment, you have to have a beginning, middle, and last part, and then, it keeps going like this. And so in that way, everything that's momentary isn't inherently existent. And we also cannot find the smallest unit of time and say, this is the smallest unit of time in which nothing changes. You can't find that because any however shortest moment of time you have has a beginning, middle, and last part. Okay? So all phenomena have parts and therefore do not abide inherently. Yeah. And we can apply this understanding that a moment of time can be mentally broken down into parts to all phenomena, be they big things like the universe or tiny things like the atom, and we can divide them into different parts. So on a physical level, everything, no matter how tiny it is, it has directional parts. It has a front and a back and a top and a bottom, and scientists are always trying to find the smallest particle. But, a smallest particle, no matter how small, always has a front and back and top and bottom. Yeah. And unless you say that the smallest particle, has no mass whatsoever, in which case it's going to be difficult to find it. Okay? So anything that has parts cannot inherently exist because it depends on its parts. Mm-hmm. So then Geshe-la goes on to clarify that the people in all these debates are rational individuals. They're not stupid people. So if we say something that isn't reasonable, they won't accept it. Yeah, and so, you know, we have to make sure we say something that's reasonable, because it's not like these people are completely stupid, and, you know, and if we're able to refute their ideas, then they usually change their ideas, so they're not closed-minded and stubborn. Okay, and when we talk with them, if they're other Buddhists, we can use scriptural quotations to like reinforce a point. But we can't use scriptural quotations with non-Buddhists because they don't have the same kind of faith in our scriptures that we do. And similarly, we don't have faith in their scriptures. So, you know, the debate has to be completely based on reasoning and logic. Okay, then 71. No material thing is in brackets, is a unitary whole because it has many directional parts, and there is no material thing that does not have directional parts. Further, without there being one, there cannot be many. Without the existent, there cannot be the non-existent. Okay, so here in the first line, yeah, it's saying that things have to have directional parts, and there's no material thing that doesn't. So everything we can think of, you know, mentally at least, even if it can't be physically divided, mentally we can divide it. And so things that are dependent on parts, you know, are under the influence of those parts, yeah? And especially if those things are impermanent, then they're under the influences of causes and conditions. But while causal dependence can refute the inherent existence of momentary phenomena, it cannot refute the inherent existence of permanent phenomena, because permanent phenomena don't have causal, you know, they're not under the influence of causal dependency. Whereas having parts, yeah, this is something that applies to both impermanent things and to permanent things. Okay, so when you're talking about permanent things, the parts aren't something that you can, you know, hold in your hand and show, like you can take a bunch of car parts and show them to somebody. Because a lot of these, most of these permanent things, they're mere negations. So you're not asserting anything positive. It's the absence of something, yeah? And so then the parts that you're talking about are, you know, are not things that people can see, because these things they're negative phenomena. They're not impermanent, positive phenomena. Okay, so when we talk about empty space, it has parts: the space in the north, the space in the south, the east and the west, the space where this table is, the space where the lamp is. Okay, so those are the parts of space. Yeah. Similarly, emptiness has parts, because when you talk about emptiness, you're using it as a, you know, the nature of reality. But you have the emptiness of the book, the emptiness of the table, the emptiness of the Buddha. So those are all the parts of emptiness. So again, don't think of part here as something that's physical that you can touch, yeah? Because you can see that these parts are kind of made up by concept in a way. It's concept that's dividing these permanent things. But still, you know, the emptiness of the table is not the same thing as the emptiness of the chair. Yeah, when you were just talking in conventional terms. If we're talking in terms of perceiving them with direct perception of emptiness, the emptiness of the table and the emptiness of the chair do not appear differently to an Arya's meditative equipoise on emptiness. Yeah, so to that direct perception, they don't appear different. They're the same, they're just emptiness. But on a conventional level, we can talk about the emptiness of the chair and the emptiness of the table because they don't exist at the same time. They're different. Yeah. If the chair is built before the table, the emptiness of the chair exists before the emptiness of the table. Because you can't have the emptiness of the chair without having a chair. Yeah. So if the chair is built first, the emptiness of the chair comes into existence when the chair is built. Then later, if the table is built, the emptiness of the table comes into existence. At the same time, the table comes, exists. Okay? So in terms of discussing about things, these two emptinesses are different. But in terms of how they appear to an Arya's non-conceptual wisdom, they're indifferentiable. So, we're going to get into the section with Jeffrey about the 16 or 18 or 20 or 2 or 4 emptinesses, So they're all emptiness, but they're just divided conceptually based on what they are the emptiness of. Okay? So, based on being the emptiness of different functioning things, those emptinesses are not the same. Okay? But in the sense of, being realized by a mind that realizes emptiness, they can't be distinguished by that mind that realizes emptiness directly. Okay. Then the second part of the verse is getting into the reasoning of not being one or many. Now, this reasoning of one or many, there's different ways that it's translated and different ways you can discuss it. One is as one and many in terms of counting. There's one thing or there's many, meaning there's many things. Another way to translate it is same and different. Yeah? And there it's two things are the same, identical, or they're different. Yeah? Okay? So there's different ways that when you hear the refutation of one or many, what one and many can be translated as and how the refutation goes. So here in this verse, it's in terms of the numerical one and many. Okay? So somebody says things exist inherently, and Nagarjuna says, are they inherently existent one? In other words, one sole thing. Yeah? And so if the person says yes, then Nagarjuna, because, if it's inherently one, then it can be inherently existent. But then, so if the guy says, yeah, there, something is inherently one unitary thing, then Nagarjuna says, well, take a material object, such as this page of the book, or, the water thing, or whatever, and he says it's not inherently existent. It's not an inherently existent one, because it has many directional parts. It has its front and its back and its top and its body and bottom and northeast, southwest. Okay, so it can't be one. Okay, so there's nothing that's either permanent or impermanent that cannot be broken down into its various parts. Yeah, so if something has directional parts, it can't be inherently existent one, because each part is something separate. Okay, the east part is not the same as the west part, is not the same as the north part, and so on. Okay? So this person says, yeah, that's correct, So then he changes his mind, what he says, and he says, now this time, there are inherently existent many. You know, in other words, well, you showed me that, yeah, things have many parts, so they're not an inherently existent one. But then they must be inherently existent many, because there's many things there, there's many parts. Okay? And here Nagarjuna says, well, since there's no inherently existent one, you can't have inherently existent many or several, because an inherently existent many is simply a collection of inherently existent ones. Okay, so to have many, first there needs to be one, and then another one, so you have two, and another one, so that you have three. Okay, but you know, if you don't have an inherently existent one, then there's no way to have an inherently existent many. Okay, and thus things can't inherently exist, because if they inherently exist, they have to be either inherently one or inherently many. Okay, then furthermore, all these things are posited in relationship to each other. Okay, so one and many are dependent on each other. Yeah, so just as long and short are mutually dependent, okay, then, you know, one and many are also mutually dependent. So they can't be inherently existent. Okay, so if you can see that material things don't exist inherently because of not being one or many, then you can use that same reasoning to apply to immaterial things such as consciousness. Okay, so is there inherently one moment of consciousness?
No.
Yeah, so no, why not?
Because if there was one moment of inherently existent consciousness, it wouldn't go and do anything.
Yeah, it couldn't change.
Yeah, it couldn't change.
It couldn't change. And also because,
It has to have parts.
Because that moment's made up of parts.
yeah, the moment is made up of parts. Okay, so it can't be inherently existent. It's dependent on its parts. Okay, so there can't be many moments of there cannot be many inherently existent moments of consciousness. Again, because in order to have many, you have to have one first. Okay, and then similarly here, without the existent, there can't be the non-existent. Okay, and so it's already been shown that material objects are not truly existent. And so now we refute the claim that a material object's emptiness of true existence is truly existent. Okay, so a table is the basis of the emptiness of true existence, the true existence of the table, okay? So since the basis of the table lacks true existence, an attribute or property of that basis, such as its emptiness of true existence, also cannot be truly existent. Okay? So also, you know, if you have the table, you have the emptiness of the table, and those two things depend on each other. You can't have a table without the table being empty of true existence. You can't have the emptiness of true existence of a table if there's no table. Okay? So the object that is empty and the emptiness of that object depend on each other. So in that way, even emptiness is dependent.
Is that considered mutual dependence?
Hold on. So even emptiness is dependent. Yeah? Emptiness cannot exist without the basis, and the basis cannot exist without the emptiness. So they are mutually dependent upon each other. Okay? So the object and its emptiness are posited in dependence upon each other. Okay? So I think here when it says without the existent there cannot be the non-existent, I think here existent means the object and non-existent means its emptiness.
Non-existent, the object?
No, that the line says, without the existent there cannot be the non-existent. So the existent and non-existent are posited in relationship to each other. The example Geshe-la gives is like a table and its emptiness. So I'm guessing that the existent means the table and non-existent is another word for emptiness in this particular case. That's the way to make the line make sense, at least to me.
Rather than the way that we sometimes see non-existence.
Not the word existent and non-existent can mean many different things. Sometimes it just means conventionally existent and non-existent. Sometimes it means inherently existent and totally non-existent. And here I think it means conventionally existent and empty. You know, Geshe-la didn't say that directly, but that's how it makes sense to me.
Geshe-la Sampardin says that too. I have a commentary, but Geshe-la Sampardin says that.
Geshe by who?
Geshe-la Sampardin.
And that's the way he described it?
Yes, conventionally and
empty.
Yeah, and empty.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. Then 72 and 73 get explained together. The existent becomes non-existent because either it ceases on its own or is counteracted by something. Okay? But since the existent is impossible, how could there be its cessation or counteragent? Okay? And then 73, therefore, ultimately the world is not lessened by someone attaining nirvana. When asked whether there is an end to the world, the victor remains silent. Okay? So, on the gross level, a thing can be destroyed in two ways. Okay, that's verse 72. Either it ceases on its own, by natural causes, it gets exhausted. You know, the light, the wax of a candle gets exhausted and it finishes. Or it's counteracted by something else. You throw water on the light, and so that puts it out. Okay? So similarly with the person can just die from aging, or they can die because, you know, they have some kind of accident that cuts their life short. Okay? So ceasing on its own is this natural disintegration, such as a peach rotting or a person growing old, and being destroyed by something else is like a pot being smashed by a hammer. Okay? So if things existed inherently, neither of these two ways of becoming non-existent could occur because inherently existent objects cannot be affected by other conditions, affected or influenced by other conditions. Okay? Because something inherently existent is permanent, a self-enclosed entity, and that remains forever in the same way. Okay? However, since inherently existent things don't exist to start with, they can't be destroyed in either of these two ways. Okay? So you might remember over the weekend, Geshe-la was saying, and this comes up a lot in the Madhyamaka text, that realizing emptiness doesn't make something that formerly was truly existent become empty. Yeah, emptiness is always there. We're just realizing what's there. Okay. Then in verse 73, the word world refers to samsara or cyclic existence. So here, you know, we're seeing at different parts in different verses, sometimes the word world means the aggregates, sometimes it means samsara, sometimes it means the environment and its inhabitants. Okay, so there's different meanings for words in different contexts. Okay, so when someone attains nirvana, an inherently existent samsara does not disappear or become non-existent. If it did, then before attaining nirvana, an inherently existent samsara would have existed. And if a samsara were inherently existent, it could never be ceased. And if it were inherently existent, it wouldn't be under the influence of the 12 links of dependent arising, which talk about how samsara comes into existence and so on. Okay, so samsara has never been inherently existent, which is why it can become non-existent, you know, on a conventional level, because, you know, you stop the causes, you stop samsara. Okay, so so the samsara that so when someone attains liberation, their inherently existent samsara could not disappear if samsara were inherently existent. Okay, however, when someone attains nirvana, their samsara becomes non-existent, meaning non-existent conventionally. Okay, so the samsara that disappears at liberation is a conventionally existent samsara, not an inherently existent one. So this is important to think about, because sometimes in our Dharma practice, you know, we may meditate a lot on samsara, you know, on the first two of the Four Truths. I have dukkha, I have the cause of dukkha. How am I ever going to get out? You know, my dukkha is so permanent and always there. The cause of dukkha is permanent, is always there. My samsara can never change. I'm doomed. You know? So that kind of view, when we get like that, that is an example of our ignorance. You know, grasping a true existence, because we're not seeing that samsara, just like everything else, is a dependent phenomena, and that dependent phenomena cannot truly exist, and that samsara, as something that depends on causes and conditions, therefore must be impermanent. And if those causes and conditions can be eliminated, then samsara can be eliminated. So earlier in this verse, he was talking about there's two ways something can cease. One is by ceasing on its own, just by running out, and the other one is being counteracted. Samsara does not cease by just being run out. Yeah, samsara ceases by applying the counterforce. Yeah, so we have to really remember that, okay? Okay, so then Geshe-la wants to apply it to us, and he says, although many of the points above are being debated with people who are non-Buddhists, actually we may hold some of the same misconceptions ourselves. You know, because sometimes if we really look at ourselves, you know, we say, oh, things are impermanent, but we're holding them as permanent. Or we say things are inherently existent, but we're holding them as truly existent. Or we say, oh, yeah, realizing emptiness doesn't newly make something empty, it's always empty. But then, you know, when we think about it some more, we meditate, we go, oh, I'm suddenly ending the whole world, you know, by meditating on emptiness. So he's really encouraging us to take all these different reasonings and apply them to our own mind and our own meditation. So not just to see it as, you know, Nagarjuna is refuting all these, you know, other people, these non-Buddhists, or the Buddhists from the lower tenet schools or something like that. Okay? So, we should, for example, reflect that a person is momentary, yeah, and that, so reflect that if a person is momentary, there isn't the fault of an effect being experienced without its cause having been created, or the fault of the result being experienced by a person who didn't create the cause. So if a person is momentary, then there's a continuum of the person. So the karma, the person who created the karma here, the continuum of that person can experience the result there. So there isn't a fault of an effect being experienced without being created by the person who's experiencing the result. And there also isn't the fault of the result being experienced by a person who didn't create a cause, because if there were a permanent person, then in each moment that person would go out of existence. There wouldn't be a continuum. So then if you had somebody experiencing a result, it could be any person from any continuum, because there would be no continuum of a person. Okay? So contemplate the continuum of a person, one moment of a person giving rise to the next moment, and how the latter moments of the person are dependent on the former ones, but they're not exactly the same. And so for that reason, karma can be created here, and the result of that can be experienced in the same continuum later on. Okay? But if the person were permanent and static, that couldn't happen because the person would never change. Okay? And then in that verse, the last line says, when asked whether there is an end to the world, the victor remains silent. Then that introduces the next verse. Okay? So verse 74. Because he did not teach the profound Dharma to beings who were not suitable vessels, the wise understand that the omniscient one is indeed omniscient. Okay? So when the Buddha was asked if the self and the world had an end or didn't have an end, he didn't reply. Okay? And here self refers to person, world refers to aggregates. So both the internal aggregates that are form part of the basis of designation of the person, and the external forms and so on in the environment. Okay? So because the Buddha didn't reply when people asked if the person, the self and the world were permanent or impermanent, or if they had an end or didn't have an end, then because he didn't say anything, then some people thought, oh, well, maybe he's not omniscient. We ask him this question, he can't answer it. This guy isn't truly omniscient. Okay? So these people believed that the person was permanent, unitary, and independent. So those three words, sometimes it's translated as permanent, partless, and independent. Okay? It's referring to the idea of an independent self or soul, that is fixed, that does not change from one life to the next, that is one unity, inherently existent one, and that doesn't depend on causes and conditions. Okay? So, according to the Buddha, there is no such person. According to the non-Buddhists, this is what their whole system revolves around, is, this kind of permanent, unitary, independent person. Okay? So, because these people were grasping at the wrong idea, whatever the Buddha said, if he answered their question, they would misunderstand it. So if he said, yes, there is an end to the aggregates, then they would have thought there's no continuity of consciousness. Because if the aggregates end,
then there's no continuity of consciousness, there's no continuity of person, so karma can't function. But if he said, no, there is no end to the aggregates, then they would have thought that there's an inherently existent person that goes from one life to the next. So whatever he answered, they would have gotten the wrong idea. So that's why he didn't answer, okay? Because they're thinking, if he talked about the self, having an end or not having an end, the Buddha may be talking about a conventionally existent self, but they're talking about a permanent, unitary, and independent one. So if he said, yes, it ended, then they would have thought, that since it ended, so then it doesn't exist, no such person exists at all, okay? Because, wait a minute, since it ended, they would have thought it exists now, although no such person exists at all. So they would have thought there's an inherently existent person now, even though there isn't. If he had said that that the self does not end, then that would only reinforce their wrong conception that there's a permanent, independent, unitary self. So it's called damned if you do and damned if you don't. Okay, so for that reason, the Buddha just didn't reply to their question. Okay? So there's an example here. So you've met somebody who has made up their mind completely that they're going to steal something. And then that person asks you, shall I, they're going to, let's say, steal somebody's car and go joyriding. And they say, shall I steal the car tonight or shall I steal the car tomorrow night? So what are you going to answer?
No.
Okay. You can't say tonight, and you can't say tomorrow night, because you don't want them to steal the car at all. But if you say, don't steal the car at all, they're not going to listen to you because they've made up their mind that they're going to steal it. Yeah? So to that kind of person, what can you say? Whatever you say is going to be wrong. And if you tell them the truth, they're not going to listen. Yeah? So, this is a lesson in how, because sometimes we think that with certain people, there's got to be a way for us to get through to them right now, without seeing that sometimes there's no way to get through to them right now, that they have to change in some way or another before anything anyone says or does is going to affect them. Yeah. So instead of getting angry at the person because they don't listen to us, instead of feeling discouraged, we have to accept the situation and have an aspiration to help them in the future when their mind is less rigid and more open. Yeah? Because if we cling on to this idea of, I've got to be able to get through to them now, then we're just going to get frustrated and angry at the end, aren't we? Yeah? So it's kind of like somebody who's doing, social activism. If you expect to change everything now, you're going to, get really exhausted. Yeah, because you need so many causes and conditions to come together. So that requires constant, continuous effort and a long-term perspective. Okay? So some people thought that the Buddha was not omniscient because he didn't answer those questions. But wise people thought that the fact that he didn't answer the questions shows that he's omniscient, because it shows that he knows their disposition and the best way to guide them. And he sees that whatever he tells them will only increase their wrong ideas. So he abstains from saying anything at all. So the people who are wise and understand this, the fact of the Buddha not giving an answer instills more faith
in his being omniscient and knowing the dispositions of sentient beings. Whereas the people who are ignorant think, well, he can't answer the question, so he's not omniscient.
The Buddha wasn't concerned with their opinion.
Hmm?
And the Buddha wasn't concerned with their opinion.
Yeah, the Buddha. Yeah. Well, the Buddha knew that whatever he did, they weren't going to think highly of him. So he didn't, get all worried about, they're going to think I'm not omniscient. What's happening to my reputation? They're never going to trust me again. I better think of some answer to tell them, But no, he knew that whatever he said, it would actually harm. So he didn't say anything. Huh? Yeah? Have you ever met people like that? I know none of us are like that. We're always open, flexible, willing to listen to anybody, Right? Yeah. Yeah. But there's these other people that we try so hard to knock some sense into their heads, and, they just run away.
Or put up their dukes.
And put up their, yeah, right. Yeah.
So somehow the example doesn't hold up for me. What the Buddha did is clear, but the example doesn't, because I can't see what the harm would be, even you're with a stubborn-minded person. Someone I know. But you might, without grasping at your outcome, just say, I think it's not a good idea to steal.
Yeah.
You just let it go.
Yeah.
But in the Buddha situation, I could see there's not really any being in there. But in this one, you
Okay,
can say
so in the example, you could say, well, you just say it's not good to steal anyway, and just leave it. So somebody could make that case. On the other hand, you could say, it's not good to steal, and then the person just gets furious with you. And said, who are you to tell me what to do? And I've already made up my mind to steal, and it's okay for me to steal. I deserve it because society doesn't treat me right. And you're a Buddhist, and you Buddhists are so weird anyway. I'm never going to read anything Buddhist because you're always going around being preachy to other people.
Yeah,
So,
more negative
yeah.
created in
Right.
mind, I see.
Yeah. I mean, that's why when I lived in Seattle and I used to walk around Green Lake and I saw these people fishing, like one part of me wanted to go up and to say, don't fish. But I knew it was totally useless and it would only create an uproar if I did. And it wouldn't do any good for anybody.
But they weren't asking you, should I fish or not?
No. Yeah. But even if they did.
It takes a lot of strength not to say.
Yeah.
To refrain.
Yeah. But it is like this thing of you really have to know people's disposition and what's beneficial and what's not. And that's hard. When do we explain things in depth? When do we refrain from explaining in depth? Yeah. When do we wait for somebody to ask rather than us just telling them how to live their life?
And even when they ask how much.
Yeah, and even when they ask to tell them how to live their life. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that you made much more of an impact just by walking by these fishermen. And they would just notice that you were a peaceful-looking person. And I bet just that image.
Oh, they were too busy looking at the fish. They didn't notice me.
When they were...
No, you know what they did? When I walked around Green Lake, the little kids would go, Mommy, that lady doesn't have any hair. So then I'd smile at the little kids. Okay, so maybe they would look, but I'm not counting on that. Okay, then there's four, then Geshe-la goes into here. There's 4 ways of replying to different types of questions. So this is quite interesting, okay? So first way, some questions can be answered straightforwardly. If someone says, is sound permanent or impermanent, we can clearly say it's permanent. You know, is the cake burnt or is it not burnt? Well, we may have some divergent opinions, but if it's really black, I think we can say it's burnt, okay? Then second is some answers require qualifications. So if somebody says, are all sentient beings who die born under the control of karma and afflictions, you can't say that directly. You have to ask, you know, you would say sentient beings who abandon afflictions and karma won't be born under their influence. For example, you know, the bodhisattvas of the path of seeing and above. But sentient beings who haven't abandoned karma and afflictions would be born under their influence. Okay. Then the third thing is, okay, so the second one was you need to qualify different parts of the answer. The third one is, before answering, you need more information. So if somebody says, is a person on the path of accumulation superior, you have to say, in relationship to who? In relationship to a person who hasn't entered the path, yes. In relationship to a person on the path of seeing, no. So you need more information. And then fourth is some questions are better left unanswered. Okay, so an example is, does a permanent, unitary, independent person have an end or not? Well, such a person doesn't exist. Yeah, so it's better to leave that unanswered. Okay, and then 75 is, thus the all-seeing perfect Buddhas have said the Dharma of the highest good is profound, unapprehensible, and also without any foundation. So this is the description of the highest good, emptiness, nirvana. Okay? So the Dharma of the highest good is nirvana, the emptiness of a mind that is free from afflictions and the karma that causes rebirth. Okay? So it is profound because it's difficult to realize. It's unapprehensible because no, that actually the word is unapprehensible. Yeah. Yeah, that's the word. Unapprehendable is not a word. Unapprehensible is the word. I looked it up. Okay? So it's unapprehensible in that it can't be established, apprehended as, or grasped as either extreme of absolutism or nihilism. So it's unapprehensible as either of the extremes. It's profound because it's difficult to realize. And it is without a foundation of inherent existence. Okay? So there's no reason that can establish it as inherently existent. So here, you know, when we're coming up saying things are without a foundation or without a basis, it means without a foundation or basis that would make them inherently existent. Okay. So the Buddha taught that by realizing and meditating on emptiness, we can attain the results of the three vehicles. Here, solitary realizer, bodhisattva vehicle. Okay? So in short, the profound, the emptiness, isn't established as either of the two extremes, and it cannot be apprehended in either, or it should not be apprehended in either of the two extreme ways, and it doesn't have a foundation or reason for being inherently existent. Okay, so we'll stop here. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I actually have a couple questions about this. I got stuck here because I'm working basically from the same translation, but they have unapprehensible as devoid of grasping. Would you say that was the same thing?
Well, it means that it can't be grasped as either inherently existent or totally non-existent.
Yeah, I guess.
So you can say it's ungraspable as either of those two things.
And then earlier, the thing I was quite interested in was where in the earlier verse where, like verse 70
Mm-hmm.
and verse 69, in the translation they used end, beginning, middle, and end.
Yes.
And I wondered about the choice for last part,
Okay.
because I knew it was deliberate.
Okay, yes. Because end, in the technical language of debate, end is after something has ceased.
Oh.
Yeah. So at the time of the seed's end, the seed no longer exists. So it's better to use last part because you're talking about the moment while it still exists, the beginning, middle, and last part. Yeah. Yeah, so it sounds funny, but you know, it's because of the technical language of debate. Okay? Because the end of one moment is simultaneous with the beginning of the next moment. So you can't say beginning, middle, and end, and then the next moment has a beginning, middle, and end, because that end of the first moment and the beginning of the second moment happen at the same time.
So the last part.
Last part,
Beginning.
the last part ceases, and then the beginning of the next moment starts. Okay, so that's why.
Cool.
Yeah?
In this verse 72 and 73,
Mm-hmm.
I was confused by this idea of ceasing on its own.
Okay,
Since
hold on, my thing isn't working. Yeah, go on.
Nothing ever arises on its own. It would cease dependently still. So then I can't understand the difference between those two kinds of ceasing. On its own or counteracting.
Yeah,
or
maybe
not.
instead because it ceases, instead of on its own, maybe we should say naturally.
Yeah, it sounds like
Yeah.
it's so solid on its own. It's like what's.
Yeah, it sounds inherently, okay.
Yeah.
So
Ceases
it ceases naturally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other one is counteracted.
Mm-hmm.
But naturally, it's still from other causes.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, by the
That's better than
exhaustion.
on its own.
It ceases, let me fix it here,
Okay,
naturally.
ceases naturally.
Yeah, but it's, the dying may not be a good example, but it's the idea of growing old.
Yeah, as opposed to an accident.
Yeah,
So is it more like it ceases by exhaustion or something?
yeah, by exhaustion, yeah,
That's a good word.
because its causes are exhausted.
Right.
It still sounds
Yeah.
the same.
And its causes are progressing it to a deteriorated state, like a rotting peach.
Yeah,
It gets really ripe and then it's susceptible to enzymes and there are things that are causing it to rot, but it's the natural.
yeah, it's the natural.
progression.
The idea is that there's not an external agent intervening. It's just you leave it there and this is what naturally happens without anything else affecting it.
Okay, that's the contrast.
Yeah,
As in counteracted by other causes.
right,
Some more gross
yeah,
happens.
yeah. One is it's just, you leave it there and it naturally decays because that's its nature. The other is something comes in and makes it break
That
or
helps, 'cause
end.
I couldn't see the difference because they both have dependent causes.
Yeah.
And changes. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So emptiness and spaces, the relationship between those, is that called a relational?
Emptiness and
its basis?
space, no, they're not related.
What is
And I mean,
dependence?
you could talk
What is-
about the emptiness
what
of
is the-
space.
Well, like you were saying, there's no emptiness of a chair without a chair.
Right. So you could say that space has an emptiness. You can talk about the emptiness of space, and space and the emptiness of space are dependent.
Space, I said basis.
Basis, yeah. So the
Emptiness and its
basis are dependent.
And is that called a relational?
Yes.
Dependence?
Yes.
Relational. Okay.
Yeah, or mutual dependence. Either one.
Either one.
Yeah, it's the same. It's two ways of translating the term: relational dependence, mutual dependence.
And in this past retreat where Geshe Dabu kept emphasizing that the imputed object is independence upon the basis of designation.
Yeah.
That's also to highlight the mutual dependence.
Yeah, that the basis of designation and the designated object also exist in relationship. Is you can't have a designated object if you don't have a basis of designation, and vice versa.
But that's just not how my mind understands it, right? You just always think there's the inherently existent object waiting for me to come along and...
Yeah, that's the way it seems, but that's not the way it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could not really understand the two emptinesses you described in 71.
The two emptinesses?
Then you referred that there are many other kinds of emptinesses, 16, 15, 10, I don't know.
You said
What?
emptiness has parts, right?
Yeah, I was talking about there's the emptiness of parts, which is the first part of the verse, and then there's the emptiness of being one or many, which is the second part of the verse.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay? So it's two different ways. It's not different. Those are not different emptinesses. Those are different reasonings to prove emptiness. That's a better way to put it. Yeah. So there's the reasoning that things depend on parts, and there's the reasoning that they depend on, are they one or many? Okay? Okay?
And on the first, before you said, you can't use scriptures if you debate with a non-Buddhist tradition, of course. What about those schools that, how you call them, those are not, what's the English word, based on scriptures, based on reasoning? For example, the Chittamatra has...
But even though we have Chittamatra based on reasoning and Chittamatra based on scripture, they both use reasoning and scripture. Yeah, when it says proponents of reasoning, it doesn't mean that they never rely on scripture. Yeah, it's just that that's what they emphasize, and so they're followers of a certain approach to Chittamatra. Okay.